Story is everything. Coming up with that much-lauded new and fresh idea can be challenging, and sometimes can take years to find, and that's exactly what happened with Godzilla Singular Point. Singular Point is the latest Japanese entry of the Godzilla franchise, and it internationally debuted on Netflix this past summer. The video that you are about to watch will be exploring the very long journey it took to craft the narrative of this show. From its origins that predate Shin Godzilla, through the twists and turns it took the production staff to finally crack the general outline. You will also be hearing from several experts and enthusiasts alike. Kevin Derendorf, John LeMay, Patrick Galvan, and Monstrosities livestream regular Rainey, who will be offering key insight and knowledge into the worlds of both anime and Godzilla productions. But before we do this, I have to ask, please subscribe to Monstrosities Tokusatsu vlog. It is undeniably through the huge support of subscribers like you that allow us to continue to make videos like these. Now, with that said, please sit back and enjoy the lost and unmade history of Godzilla Singular Point. Piecing together the creative process behind Godzilla Singular Point's story is as much of a puzzle as anything that actually appears in the show itself. There is no comprehensive article or video, at least as of yet, that neatly lays out the entire history for easy consumption. Thus, many interviews, articles, live streams, video commentaries, and more were translated and scoured over in order to compose something of a cohesive narrative for the purpose of this video. Even then, there are conflicting accounts of the hows and whens, and many times no answers as to the whys. Speculation, expert opinion, and best guesses will pop in to fill in those gaps, but the goal here is to stick as closely to the facts as possible.
Anime is very popular all over the world right now.
We've definitely seen its popularity explode in the West, with so many streaming services now putting money towards acquiring new services or even commissioning them. Netflix in particular has opened up anime to the world, where it sits along like normal TV shows and movies in the recommendation bar. Completely different from the past, where someone would have to sign up for a targeted service like Crunchyroll, Funimation, that sort of thing.
There's a limitless possibility in terms of what you can represent in animation. You don't have to worry about budgeting to the same extent that you would have to in order to do something in live action. Because of that, Japanese animation, especially in genres like science fiction, have really just skyrocketed, and frankly, it's a little surprising that Toho hasn't leveraged Godzilla more in the field of Japanese animation.
A Godzilla anime TV show. It would run 13 30-minute episodes, which would later be re-edited into a theatrical film. Though Toho Studios likely conceived this idea earlier, the company actively began to gather staff for the project sometime in 2013 or 2014, with the hiring of directors Kobun Shizuno, who had made his name through several Detective Conan films, and Hiroyuki Sashida, the director of the 3D animated Knights of Sidonia. The project also added the star power of writer Gen Urobuchi, the co-creator of Madoka Magica and the writer of Toei's Kamen Rider Gaim. The anime adaptation was originally planned to expand the possibilities of Godzilla, said director Sashida to Da Vinci Magazine in 2017. The first concept was how to make a Godzilla that could be enjoyed by people who were not interested in tokusatsu but might watch anime. Given a huge amount of creative freedom, the Godzilla anime team began to develop their show, giving it a setting in a far apocalyptic future where humanity had nearly been wiped out by Godzilla itself. But then, in 2016, everything changed.
Shin Godzilla is definitely, from a historical standpoint and a cultural standpoint, probably by far the most interesting Godzilla film made in 30 or so years.
If you look at Toho's projected profits for 2016, they were looking at making about 22 billion yen. And thanks to two movies, Your Name and Shin Godzilla, in the same year, their actual profits were 33 billion yen. So that's 50% increase over their projection, which is monumental.
I think it won 7 awards at the Japanese Academy Prizes, including Best Picture, and the ticket sales was upwards of 5 million.
It's the most attended Godzilla movie since the 1960s and brought a whole new audience, a whole new set of fans into the franchise and into the character.
It wasn't just Godzilla fans saying, hey, let's go see this. It was ordinary moviegoers saying, hey, there's a new film, Shin Godzilla, let's go see this film. The Godzilla franchise, for about 15 or so years before that was kind of anachronistic with the Japanese mainland public. Sure, there are otaku and hardcore Godzilla fans in Japan, but the tricky thing is getting the general audience to say, hey, let's go see this new kaiju film, let's see this new Godzilla film.
It really resonated with issues that modern Japanese people were thinking about. On that end, it became part of the cultural zeitgeist. This has really just turned the Godzilla franchise on its head.
The success of Shin Godzilla suddenly had Toho rethinking their Godzilla anime TV plans, and to capitalize on the sudden boom of popularity, 13-episode anime was reorganized into a trilogy of motion pictures that would debut the following year in 2017. But Toho did not abandon the idea of a Godzilla anime TV show. In fact, as Godzilla Monster Planet, the first of the new anime movies, was being worked on, Toho restarted the project. It would share many of the same characteristics as its predecessor, a 13-episode framework, the use of 3D CG animation, and the want to appeal to non-Godzilla fans through a new storytelling medium. At the core of this new Godzilla anime series would be producer Takahashi Yoshizawa, the Toho animation producer who was also overseeing the Godzilla anime trilogy. It would also be his mission to form a production committee, essentially a short-term company made up of other companies who have invested into the production itself. As the article, The Fascinating World of Anime Production Committees, points out, these investments help to minimize the risk to any one company by spreading costs while allowing them to make money in their field of expertise. For their investments, these companies would be granted certain rights in their respective fields: domestic release, international distribution, so in this case Netflix, merchandise licensing, and the like. Rather than going expressly with 3D CG animation as the Godzilla anime trilogy was doing, it was decided this new show would be a combination of both 3D CG and 2D hand-drawn animation, with animation studios Bones and Orange taking the lead.
Studio Bones has been around for about 2 decades at this point, so I think most people would have heard at least one series that they've worked on. Older anime fans would have definitely heard about at least Ouran High School Host Club and Full Metal Alchemist, while newer fans would be more familiar with My Hero Academia and Mob Psycho 100.
Tokusatsu fans will likely be interested in a handful of other projects that they've done. Things like The Skullman, which was based on Shotaro Ishinomori's sort of proto-Kamen Rider. They have a series called Hisone and Maso-kan, or it's called Dragon Pilot in the US. This was produced by Shinji Higuchi for Netflix.
Bones doesn't tend to have any one particular genre they stick to, but they are very well known for their action scenes, and in the case of Mob Psycho 100, they're also very willing to try different things to achieve something really interesting and new as well.
Moving on to Studio Orange, they were founded in 2004, and they're basically a CG animation studio.
So they started out making, providing assets for various shows, but they have done a couple series on their own, like Beastars and Land of the Lustrous, which I think more people should check out because it's amazing.
Both of those shows were made with Toho Animation. Orange sort of started getting work with Toho on their very first show, Majestic Prince, which is a mecha show, so Orange did the CGI animation for that.
With the production committee set, Toho and Studio Bones went looking for a director, and in March of 2017, they offered the job to Atsushi Takahashi.
Takahashi has been working in the industry for just a little over 2 decades now. A lot of people start as animators, but Takahashi definitely seemed interested in being a director from the get-go. And he got his big break by directing Ride Back in 2009, which is about an injured ballerina that comes across a motorcycle-like robot fusion thing. The series combined 2D and 3D animation in ways others had never been able to do before, and really well as well.
Takahashi's also on some fan radars for the Blue Exorcist film. It's based on a manga by Kazue Kato, who did the Godzilla Singular Point character designs. Takahashi was an assistant director on the Oscar award-winning film Spirited Away, the Studio Ghibli picture, which Godzilla Singular Point monster designer Eiji Yamamori worked on. So he's directed a bunch, but he's also a prolific storyboarder on big titles like My Hero Academia and Mob Psycho 100.
It's a little hard to say what Takahashi is like as a person, but to me he seems like the sort of person that's good at recognizing talent and making sure to bring out the potential in shows by surrounding himself with those talents.
It was Takahashi's Doraemon movie, Nobita's Great Adventure in the Antarctic, which was also distributed by Toho Studios, that caught the eye of producer Yoshizawa. The film was a well-researched and well-produced movie. The balance between the quality of the film's production and its entertainment value made it a perfect match for this project, and that's why I offered the job to him, Yoshizawa said in a CG World interview. Along with the job offer, Studio Bones and Toho also proposed an initial story which Takahashi recalled in an interview with GetNews.jp. They asked, "Would you make a Godzilla TV show for us? Would you make a show featuring Godzilla fighting monsters from around the world?" This was their offer to me. The initial Bones Toho story pitch sounds remarkably similar to that of 2004's Godzilla Final Wars, the finale of the Millennium-era films, which saw Godzilla globetrotting and kicking various kaiju butt. While critically a flop, the movie arguably offered the most action ever seen in a Godzilla movie up to that point.
When you talk about Toho approaching Takahashi about doing a Godzilla series where he just kind of goes around the world fighting monsters, I mean, on the one hand, I like that, but on the other hand, that has been done a lot on the previous Godzilla animated series, you know, because you had the Hanna-Barbera, that's basically what he did, which I love that. And that's also what he did in Godzilla the Animated Series from Fox Kids.
While this obviously can be done very well, if you look at Godzilla the series, it's something that has been done very well if you look at Godzilla the series. So I can understand a director looking at that and thinking, oh, I don't want to just repeat what's already been done before.
I think it's wise that they went with something more serialized with an ongoing story.
I think it was a good first idea, but I'm kind of glad it was dropped.
This idea might have been the initial production proposal for the Godzilla anime series, a document created to sell staff and producers on a new project's premise. Production proposals can be very detailed or incredibly vague, and often do not set story details in stone. Takahashi eventually accepted the director job, but he wondered if Godzilla battling monsters around the world would be enough for this new anime series. Would it be more interesting to maybe pursue a different approach? Luckily for Takahashi, the job offer also came with it some incredible creative freedom. The offer was, any approach is fine as long as it's Godzilla, Takahashi told Egahiho magazine. I could do whatever I wanted. Even with incredible creative freedom, the pressure was high for director Takahashi. For one, he admittedly had no specific story ideas when he took the job. Secondly, he found the very idea of Godzilla challenging, an inconsistent character with so many variations across nearly 7 decades worth of media. And lastly, he would have to follow the order of Toho and find a story that would appeal to young audiences as Shin Godzilla had before. It's hard for new people to get into a work that has a strong core audience, and if it is made too maniacally for a specific fan base, the hurdle becomes even higher. But if you make a work for new fans, you will lose your old fans. I thought it was difficult to find the right balance. I was more concerned about whether the Tokusatsu fans would actually watch the anime when it was made. In the Godzilla Singular Point fanbook, Takahashi mentions 2 early ideas he had. One of them almost sounded like an Expendables vs. Godzilla scenario, where an alliance of the world's strongest soldiers would gather to fight Godzilla. Takahashi admitted that this was one of his more childish ideas. However, Takahashi's second scenario was something that may have been more seriously considered, and it was unlike anything yet seen in the Godzilla franchise. The music for Godzilla Singular Point was done beautifully by composer Kan Sawada, who had first worked with director Takahashi on his Doraemon movie. The two quickly became friends, as they both loved science fiction and were also like-minded creatives. He would frequently understand my references and explanations and helped everything flow smoothly, Takahashi said while explaining his professional relationship with Sawada. I was very lucky to have someone so like-minded close to the production. The men would frequently get lunch and go out drinking together, and it was during one of these outings, in 2017, that Takahashi let Sawada in on a little secret. Casually, when we were drinking, he said, "There's a possibility I might be doing Godzilla soon. Can you do the music?" I was like, huh? Sawada explained on the Godzilla Singular Point Climax Memorial livestream. Sawada further elaborated on this night in the Godzilla Singular Point fanbook. Back then, he just jokingly told me that they would be remaking Godzilla, this time set in the Edo period. While Sawada remembers the story set in Japan's Edo period, an era of peace and stability that began with the rise of the shogunate in 1603, Takahashi discussed this very idea in the Godzilla Singular Point fanbook, placing the story squarely in the Sengoku period, or Warring States period, that occurred between 1467 to 1615. Godzilla would appear during the Warring States period in Japanese history and have different political warrior factions fight against it. Unlike the Edo period, the Sengoku period was rife with civil war and political strife, a far more exciting setting for a story. Takahashi also mentions how this idea would be like the Samurai Kakeibo, a non-fiction history book that was published in 2003. Samurai Kakeibo gives an incredibly detailed account of samurai life from 1842 to 1879 through a collection of account books and letters. Perhaps this would have been the narrative style of Takahashi's Godzilla vs. Samurai concept.
So samurai and period pieces have been sort of the backbone of Japanese entertainment for as long as there's been Japanese entertainment. But in recent years, you do see fewer productions that are sort of focused around these period pieces. You see a lot more science fiction, a lot more modern types of pieces. So it's tempting to say that they're losing ground.
I'm not an absolute authority on this, but my understanding is that, for the last, I'd say 30 or so years, Jidaigeki is not extraordinarily popular with the modern day Japanese. That's not to say that there aren't exceptions. One little anecdote, our friend Norman Englund, who covered all the Millennium Godzilla films for Fangoria as well as Gamera 3 and various other Japanese genre films, when he was visiting the Daiei studios to cover the special effects filming for Gamera 3, there was a time where he was walking around with somebody who I think was in the PR department, and they saw a statue of Daimajin. And Norman asked the PR guy, hey, when's Daiei going to make a new Daimajin film? And the guy said to him something to the effect of, well, Jidaigeki is so expensive because of the elaborate costumes you got to make, the elaborate sets you got to make, that, studios just don't want to bankroll on it unless it's guaranteed to be successful.
However, if you look at sales, there's a series called Demon Slayer, which over the past 2 years sold more copies than the entire American comics industry combined.
And also the Demon Slayer movie recently became not just the highest grossing anime of all time, but the highest grossing Japanese film of all time. So it's definitely still popular.
I don't think that there's a lack of appetite for these sorts of stories. I think they might just be getting concentrated into your mega hits. The same deal with the Rurouni Kenshin movies, which just came out with their 5th film.
Rurouni Kenshin is probably the most well-known of all samurai anime out there, and although it was initially created in the 90s, it's still getting live-action adaptations even now.
So you see fewer titles, but the titles that do exist are quite popular. You also see a big trend of taking modern characters and putting them into a samurai period context. There's a Sengoku Gridman manga. You got Garo Crimson Moon, which was set in the Heian era. And this is also popular abroad. If you look at some of the co-produced titles, there was a direct-to-video movie called, in Japan it was called Ninja Batman, in the US it's called Batman Ninja, where Batman travels back in time and becomes a ninja. You also have these Star Wars figures that are sort of redesigned to look like samurai. And Netflix just announced recently that there's going to be a sequel to their original film Bright that's animated and set in samurai times. So this is something that seems to be considered popular on the international stage, is taking these established modern characters and porting them into period pieces. And Godzilla's actually toyed with that idea before. You had the Rage Across Time, that comic anthology had Godzilla traveling through time, including a samurai time pieces. There was the big comic original Godzilla, had a piece called Late Muromachi Godzilla. You had a mobile game that was set in the Sengoku period. And there was also some plans when they thought that Yamato Takeru was going to be a big hit new franchise. There was talk about bringing Godzilla into that for one of the entries as well.
Before Takahashi, there was a proposal for a Godzilla Samurai mashup. Creative minds think alike, and I don't think Takahashi took this idea from anybody. I think just, again, creative minds, they get the same great ideas a lot, but who had the idea before him was actually Yukiko Takayama, who wrote Terror of Mechagodzilla. Should clarify, she did not have that idea back in 1975. It was just an idea that she had as a writer later in life. So in a 2010 interview with Todorama G-Fan number 91, Takayama was asked what scenario she would create for a new Godzilla film. Though she said she thought it was best to leave Godzilla to the next generation, she did say, if I had a chance, I would like to go back to the ancient time. Truly the ancient time. People always look at the future, but why don't we look back? For example, imagine the armored warriors fight with Godzilla. This is just a casual idea that popped into my head. A story like The Tale of the Heike would be good. The movie could have a princess from the Heian period and armored warriors. Godzilla could destroy the ancient palace or castle.
As for setting Godzilla in an era full of samurai, it isn't exactly a surprising idea to me because of the popularity of it. At the same time, I'm kind of put off by the idea because Godzilla is definitely more of a modern creation, and I think it'd look a bit silly having him surrounded by very short buildings.
If you look at Daimajin, which is sort of the major kaiju of samurai films, he's only about 4 meters tall, and Godzilla is 50 meters tall at the smallest, and he kind of dwarfed the scale of buildings that existed at that time. So you'd have to work around things like that in order to make the narrative kind of work together.
I don't think Godzilla, the villain, would work back then because he would just obliterate, everybody so easily. I think what would work better would be more of a Godzilla the hero type story. If maybe the good Godzilla gets sent back in time for some reason and has to fight some bad monster from that time period, which I guess sounds a little bit like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, so maybe that's not the best comparison.
From that night that Takahashi pitched Sawada the Godzilla vs. Samurai idea, it would be a full 2 years before the director would get back to the music composer about the project. Then 2019 rolled around and Takahashi told me that we would be moving on with the production of Godzilla. He also told me that the setting had changed from the Edo period to the near future, and that he had asked Enjo-san to write the script, Sawada said in the Godzilla Singular Point fanbook. So why was the Godzilla vs. Samurai idea dropped? Well, a possibility could be due to something called the Godzilla Method. There's something called the Godzilla Method, director Takahashi described on the Episode 1 Blu-ray commentary of Godzilla Singular Point. Godzilla can't die, you can't have Godzilla eat, and you can't change Godzilla's shape. From John DeBont to Shinji Higuchi, directors on both sides of the Pacific have described a similar set of rules over the decades, guidelines that Toho has in place to preserve both the appearance and character of Godzilla itself.
We all know from the production of the 1998 Godzilla movie that Toho has a set of rules for dealing with Godzilla. Apparently there's over 70 pages worth. It's not clear how much those have changed over time, but there are all sorts of things like Godzilla must have 4 toes, Godzilla doesn't eat people, Godzilla must have 3 rows of dorsal spikes and cannot die, and things like that. That said, Toho has certainly changed these rules or ignored them selectively in the past themselves, so it might be one of those situations like when you tell a babysitter, I don't want my kids eating candy, but then it's okay if I feed my kids candy.
An interesting story is when Shinji Higuchi came to G-Fest in 2017, he was talking about, in one of his interviews, how they were approaching the idea of Godzilla evolving. That was something that he and Anno had wanted to do basically from day one. And initially they pitched the idea of Godzilla starting off looking like Godzilla and then evolving into something completely new and different. And Toho said, well, we don't really want you to do that because that's kind of like, against how we want to have Godzilla portrayed. So they compromised by, doing the reverse, having Godzilla start off looking completely unlike he'd ever done before, but by the middle of the film, it looks a lot more closer to the standard Godzilla design, what have you.
Eventual series composer Toho Enjo described additional rules of the so-called Godzilla Method in an interview to Gigazine.net, including one that might have killed the Godzilla Samurai plot on arrival. There was a lot of talk about, please don't eat people, Enjo explained. It's okay to bite other monsters, but please let us know when you eat them. And please don't show Godzilla in the time before the first movie. Avoiding problematic and controversial parts of Japan's own history could be the reason this particular rule exists. Look no further than Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah.
A gigantic dinosaur is attacking our boys! A dinosaur? What?
Its scenes of 1944-era American soldiers being taken out by the Godzillasaurs sparked anger overseas after American trash show Entertainment Tonight caught wind of it and ran a piece calling the film anti-American. Real or not, one can understand why Toho would want to avoid any kind of international controversy that could negatively affect its product. Yes, the horrors of World War II are a far different subject than that of the Edo period, but who knows how chronologically expansive this rule was, let alone if it was even the thing that ultimately killed the Godzilla vs. Samurai concept. However, this ghost of an idea still haunts the 13 episodes of Godzilla Singular Point. From the gigantic mural in episode 1 to Goro Otaki's constant quoting of kabuki plays, it still is very much within the fabric of the show's story. With the Godzilla vs. Samurai plot out the window, Takahashi continued on to imagine new scenarios, and his next idea would require the expertise of a physicist. Sci-fi writer Toho Enjo joins the production, and we will explore some of his impossible story pitches in part 2 of the lost and unmade history of Godzilla Singular Point.